The rain fell with a relentlessness that seemed bent on washing the world away. It slicked the wooden boards of the empty porches, streaked the dust-choked windows of shuttered homes, and poured from the heavens in sheets that blurred horizon from earth. Through it staggered a young widow, her calico dress clinging to her thin frame, her dark hair plastered across her face like strands of sorrow. In her arms, wrapped in a damp scrap of cloth, a child whimpered, a fragile sound swallowed almost at once by the storm. Her name was Tala Redbird, though few in town cared to use it. To most, she was the cursed bride whose husband had died before the ink on their vows had dried. Rejection had become her companion since that day, sharper than hunger, more biting than cold. She had knocked on doors until her knuckles bled, pleading for a corner by a stove, a crust of bread, a mercy of some kind. But doors closed quick as shutters before lightning, and voices whispered through cracks that the widow carried misfortune like a disease. The child stirred against her breast, small fists trembling. Tala adjusted her grip, whispering a lullaby her own mother had once hummed by the riverbank. The song broke on her lips, drowned by rain, but she pressed on, forcing the melody to steady her heart. Her boots, already split, sank into mud, each step heavier than the last. The trading post loomed ahead, its lantern casting a feeble glow into the downpour. Perhaps, she thought, someone there might pity her tonight. She reached the porch, set the child against her shoulder, and rapped on the door. Light shifted within. A shadow moved. But when the door creaked open, Judith Harper's sharp face appeared, framed by gray curls dampened with the storm's spray. Her eyes narrowed. "Tala," she said, drawing the name out like a thorn. "You shouldn't be here." "I only ask a place till morning," Tala whispered. Her voice was hoarse, thin as twine. "The baby, she's cold." Judith's gaze flicked to the bundle, then back to Tala's hollow eyes. Behind her, voices murmured, and Elias Harper's chuckle carried low and cruel. "Let the Apache widow freeze," he muttered. Judith didn't repeat the words, but her mouth twisted in agreement. The door closed, the latch fell, and Tala was left on the porch with the storm pressing against her like a wall. Her knees buckled. She sank onto the step, pressing the baby close, rocking with a desperate rhythm. The rain soaked through everything, cloth, skin, spirit. Shame rose in her throat, hot and choking. If she had been stronger, cleverer, worthier, perhaps she would not be cast aside. Perhaps her daughter would not have to shiver in her arms tonight. The storm offered no answer, only the hiss of water against earth. Yet beneath that roar came another sound, the creak of leather, the heavy crunch of boots through mud. She looked up, heart stuttering, expecting another villager with scorn ready on their tongue. Instead, through the curtain of rain, she saw him. A man of formidable height emerged from the pines, his broad chest bare beneath the rain, skin gleaming bronze in the lantern's faint glow. Across his shoulders, scars traced silent stories, and in his arms he bore firewood as though it weighed nothing. His hair, black as the storm clouds, clung to his face, and his eyes, dark, unyielding, found her without hesitation. The villagers who had lingered on the porch scattered back into shadow. None dared meet his gaze. He was known and feared, though seldom spoken to. Nakoa, the Apache who lived beyond the ridge. Children whispered of him around fires. Grown men spat his name like a curse. Yet he walked toward her with no haste, only a steadiness that unsettled the night. Tala tightened her hold on the child. Fear prickled her skin. What could he want with her, a stranger drowning in shame? She tried to rise, but her legs faltered. Rain blurred her sight, and still he came, his steps sure as stone. He stopped before her, firewood balanced easily in one hand. With the other he brushed his soaked hair from his brow and studied her, as if she were not a burden, not a curse, but something that demanded care. For a moment, neither spoke. Then, in a voice low and roughened by silence, he said, "Don't be afraid. You are safe with me." The word struck deeper than the storm. Safe. No one had spoken that word to her since her husband's grave closed. She shook her head, unable to believe, unwilling to trust. "I cannot. I will not bring more trouble." Nakoa crouched, setting the firewood upon the porch. His movements were slow, deliberate, without threat. He glanced at the child who whimpered again, and from within his coat he drew a strip of soft hide, dry despite the storm, and held it out. Tala hesitated, then, shivering, accepted it, wrapping it around her daughter's frail body. Judith Harper's face reappeared in the window, eyes narrow with disdain. Behind her, Elias sneered. The storm had not drowned their gossip, only sharpened it. The sight of Nakoa kneeling beside Tala was enough to stir whispers that would carry into morning like wildfire. But Nakoa did not look at them. He rose to his full height, towering, and in one seamless motion he bent and lifted Tala into his arms, as though she were lighter than the wood he carried. She gasped, clutching her child tighter, but he did not falter, did not seek permission. His warmth, even in the rain, surrounded her like a shield. The porch boards creaked under his weight. Judith's hand moved as if to unlatch the door again, but Elias pulled her back, muttering, "Let him take her. She's his curse now." Their voices barely reached Tala, muffled by the drum of rain and the pounding of her own heart. The villager's eyes followed as Nakoa stepped from the trading post into the storm once more, carrying the widow and her child toward the dark line of pines that waited beyond the road. The lantern light dwindled behind them, swallowed by rain, until only the hiss of water and the rhythm of his strides remained. Tala pressed her face against his shoulder, half in fear, half in exhaustion. She wanted to protest, to demand where he was taking her, but the words would not come. The warmth of his body seeped through her sodden dress, steadying her shaking limbs. The child sighed in sleep, safe for the first time that night. The storm roared on, yet within its fury, a strange silence grew between them, a silence heavy with promise and peril alike. She dared a glance upward. His expression was unreadable, carved from stone, yet his eyes burned with something that unsettled her more than scorn ever had: resolve. And so, as the town watched from their shuttered windows, whispers already coiling like snakes, Tala disappeared into the rain, cradled against the chest of the man they feared most, uncertain if she had been rescued, or taken into a fate darker than the storm itself. The cabin stood against the storm like a sentinel of wood and stone, its timbers dark with rain, its small window spilling a faint glow onto the sodden earth. Nakoa pushed the door open with his shoulder, stepping inside without breaking stride, and the world of rain fell away behind them. The sudden hush was almost startling, broken only by the hiss of wet clothes dripping onto the floorboards, and the low crackle of a fire smoldering in the hearth. Tala clutched her child tighter, her breath shallow, uncertain if she had been carried into safety, or into some new danger she could not yet name. Nakoa set her gently onto a bearskin laid near the fire. For the first time since he had lifted her, she was able to look around. The cabin was simple, stark, rough-hewn walls, a table scarred by years of use, shelves lined with jars of herbs and bundles of dried meat. There was no excess, no softness, and yet a strange order held everything in place, as though each object had been chosen with care. The fire, fed by thick logs, cast a glow that made the shadows dance like silent sentries across the walls. Tala drew the hide more snugly around her daughter, who whimpered once before sinking back into the uneasy half-sleep of infants. Steam rose from the soaked folds of her calico dress, and she shivered, her eyes flicking to Nakoa as he crossed the room. He moved with the quietness of a hunter, deliberate, every step anchored in calm strength. He removed his dripping boots, set them aside, and crouched to stir the fire until it flared brighter, filling the space with the scent of resin and smoke. "I will not stay," Tala said suddenly, her voice breaking the silence like a brittle twig. "When the storm lifts, I will go. You have done enough." He did not look at her. He added another log to the flames, sparks leaping, then straightened, his broad frame outlined by firelight. His eyes, when they met hers, carried no argument, no pleading, only a stillness that unsettled her more than anger would have. He simply inclined his head as if to say the matter was not urgent, and turned to fetch a blanket from a chest in the corner. Tala hugged her knees beneath her child, heat rising in her cheeks. The quietness of his acceptance shamed her. She had grown used to harsh words, to suspicion, to doors slammed in her face. She knew how to steel herself against cruelty. But against silence, kind silence, she had no defense. He draped the woolen blanket over her shoulders, careful not to touch her skin. The gesture made her throat tighten. She wanted to protest again, to remind him she carried only trouble, but the warmth of the blanket seeped into her bones, dissolving her words. As the night deepened, the cabin became a cocoon of firelight and shadow. Tala studied him in the shifting glow, the scars on his chest, the way his hands moved with practiced steadiness as he hung herbs near the fire to dry, the silent discipline of a man who needed few words. There was no mockery in his gaze when it returned to her, no weight of judgment. And yet her own shame filled the room, heavy and suffocating. She thought of Judith Harper's face, pinched with disdain at the window. She thought of Elias's sneer, of the whispers that would multiply by morning. The widow has gone to the Apache's bed. Though no such thing had passed between them, she knew gossip did not need truth to spread. Her body trembled at the thought. "Why did you carry us?" she asked at last, her voice barely above the fire's crackle. "When everyone else turned away, why did you not?" Nakoa poured water into a pot and set it over the fire. For a long while he said nothing, the silence pressing until she wished she had not asked. Then he said simply, "Because no one should drown in the rain." The answer was so plain, so unadorned, that it lodged in her chest like a stone. She looked down at her daughter's face, softened in sleep, and her eyes blurred. She wanted to believe him, wanted to let that simple mercy be enough, but her shame fought against it. "I bring you nothing but burden," she whispered. "They will hate you for it." He met her gaze without flinching. "They already do." The fire popped. The storm outside battered the cabin walls, yet within, his words settled like an anchor. She realized with a shiver that he had carried his own weight of rejection long before she crossed his path. Perhaps that was why he had lifted her so easily, why her shame seemed to matter less in his presence. Still, unease gnawed at her. She rose, unsteady, and made for the door as though distance might protect them both. Her hand reached for the latch, but she faltered, the image of the storm beyond flashing before her. Rain against her face, mud beneath her boots, the child's thin cries lost to wind. She could not face it again. She pressed her forehead to the wood, trembling. Behind her, his steps came closer, unhurried. She braced for his hand on her shoulder, for a command to return, but none came. Instead, he reached past her, lifted the bucket near the door, and went out into the storm alone. When he returned, dripping again, he set the bucket down and said nothing, only stoked the fire higher. The choice to stay or to leave was hers alone. Her throat ached. Mercy without demand. What was she to do with it? The child stirred, coughing softly, and instinct pulled Tala back to the hearth. She held Chenoa close to the warmth, whispering lullabies with a trembling voice. She felt Nakoa's eyes upon them, but when she looked up, he had turned away, seated by the fire, sharpening a knife with slow, steady strokes. His restraint unsettled her most of all. Outside, the storm began to ease, its fury fading to a steady drizzle. The cabin seemed to exhale, its shadows lengthening with the softened firelight. Tala's body sagged with exhaustion. She laid the child down on the bearskin, watching as her daughter's chest rose and fell in peaceful rhythm. For the first time in days, perhaps weeks, the child slept without shivering. Tala brushed damp hair from her own face and glanced toward the man by the fire. He did not look at her, did not claim triumph for her safety. He sat as though carved into the silence, the rhythmic scrape of steel against stone the only sound he offered. She studied him, the breadth of his shoulders, the unyielding calm of his presence, and something within her shifted. Small, tentative, yet undeniable. She wrapped the blanket tighter, feeling its warmth as though it carried the weight of a vow. Shame still whispered that she did not belong here, that the town's eyes would brand her fallen. Yet another whisper rose quietly against it, the echo of his words. No one should drown in the rain. The storm outside had broken, but a greater one was gathering beyond these walls, one of whispers, judgment, and suspicion. She knew it would come. And as she sat by the fire with her child safe against her side, she realized with a shudder that she no longer feared the storm. What she feared was how deeply she wanted to remain. Morning came soft, with mist rising from the drenched earth, and the air holding the scent of pine and rain-washed soil. Tala stirred awake on the bearskin. Her daughter curled against her chest, both wrapped in the woolen blanket. The fire had burned low, but warmth still lingered in the cabin, steady and protective. She sat up slowly, brushing damp hair from her face, and found Nakoa outside the window, already at work. He moved with the same quiet strength as before, splitting logs with a swing so fluid it seemed born of long ritual. Each strike echoed into the clearing, a rhythm as natural as breath. She watched him for a moment too long, her heart stumbling at the sight of his steadiness, before shame flushed her cheeks and she turned away. Chenoa whimpered, stretching small fists. Tala hushed her with a kiss to the crown of her head, whispering that they would not overstay, that they would leave soon. Yet even as she spoke, her gaze lingered on the rough-hewn shelves and the warmth of the fire. Her words were not conviction. They were defense against the longing she dared not admit. When Nakoa stepped back inside, carrying a fresh armful of wood, he placed a strip of dried venison by the fire. "Eat," he said simply. Tala hesitated, then broke it with trembling fingers, softening a piece in water for the child before tasting it herself. The meat was plain, smoky, but she chewed with gratitude, aware that he watched without judgment. The days unfolded with a strange rhythm that both unsettled and soothed her. She mended a tear in his shirt, her needle pulling threads tight as she sat by the hearth. When she set the garment back on the table, folded with care, she expected mockery. Instead, he simply nodded once, the acknowledgement weightier than praise. Later, she swept the porch, her dress hem trailing in the dust. He passed her carrying buckets from the stream, saying nothing, but she noticed the faintest shift in his eyes, as though her presence no longer felt temporary. Her shame fought against these small acts. "You do not belong here," the whispers in her mind hissed. But her hands, busy with work, told a different story, one of quiet belonging she had not known since girlhood. At dusk, Nakoa sat carving wood while Chenoa crawled unsteadily toward him, her laugh bright as sunlight through trees. He let her grasp the smooth feather he had whittled, patient and unhurried as she studied it with wide eyes. Tala's throat tightened at the sight, something tender blooming where grief had long dwelled. She turned away quickly, afraid to be caught in the ache of wanting more than she deserved. In town, however, the story darkened. Judith Harper's tongue wagged freely. "The widow's gone wild, living in the Apache's hut," she told anyone who'd listen. Elias added fuel, sneering that Nakoa had stolen her, that she'd chosen shame over decency. These words slithered into ears and grew, until the name of Tala Redbird carried not pity but contempt. She felt it when she braved the town for flour, her steps slow, her child clinging to her hip. The women at the mercantile looked away, their silence sharper than insults. Elias leaned against the post outside, hat tipped back, a smirk on his lips. "You'll come to regret it," he said softly, just for her to hear. "An Apache's arms won't shield you from a town's judgment." Her cheeks burned, her hands shook, but she said nothing. She turned back toward the ridge, where Nakoa waited with the wagon. His stillness was a shield, but it could not hide her trembling. As they rode back in silence, she wondered how long before the town's whispers became something heavier. That night, she sat by the fire with her daughter asleep in her lap. The quilt she had been piecing together from scraps, cloth Nakoa had left in a chest, remnants of hunts and trades, lay across her knees. Her stitches were uneven, her hands clumsy, yet each thread held a stubbornness, a refusal to be undone. She did not hear him approach until his shadow stretched across the cloth. He looked down, studying the half-finished quilt, then her face. "You are making a home," he said, not a question but a truth spoken aloud. Her breath caught. "It is not mine to make." He shook his head, the firelight catching the scars across his chest. "It is yours if you take it." She looked at him, searching for the demand she expected, but found none. Only steadiness, as before. Her chest ached with the weight of it. Later, lying awake while the child slept, she whispered into the dark, "Why do you not ask anything of me?" The shadows gave no answer, but she felt the truth pressing in. His silence was not indifference, but restraint, a grace she had never known. Still, unease coiled around her heart. She had seen the sheriff watching them in town, his brow furrowed. She had heard Elias's threats beneath his laughter. The more she worked beside Nakoa, the more she belonged, and the more dangerous that belonging became. One evening, rain fell again, softer this time, the kind that turned the air sweet and made the earth smell alive. Tala stepped outside, shawl pulled tight, and watched him split wood, the drops shining on his skin. Her eyes lingered too long. When he glanced up, their gazes locked, and she felt her pulse leap. She turned away quickly, cheeks burning, clutching her shawl as though it could hold in the storm rising within her. Inside, she laid her daughter down and tried to still her heart. She told herself it was gratitude, nothing more. Gratitude for the roof above, for the fire, for the man who had lifted her from the rain when all others turned away. But the whisper of longing would not be silenced. It came to a breaking point when Elias confronted them outright. Tala had walked with Nakoa into town for supplies, the child rapped against her. Elias stepped from the porch of the saloon, his voice loud enough for all to hear. "There goes the whore and her savage," he sneered. The crowd hushed, eyes sharp, waiting for Nakoa's fury. But he did not rise to it. He kept walking, his face carved in calm stone. The shame that Elias intended to crush her with instead flared into something different, anger, hot and unshakable. Tala's voice shook as she hissed, "Why do you endure their poison in silence?" He met her eyes with that same steadiness. "Because they do not decide who you are." The words cracked something inside her, a fissure that let light seep through. For the first time, she wondered if dignity might not be given by others at all, but taken, kept, and lived. Yet even as this thought stirred, the danger grew. That night, Sheriff Briggs came quietly to the cabin, rain dripping from his hat brim. He spoke low, his tone not unkind. "Trouble is brewing. The Harpers won't rest till they drive you out. Be ready." When he left, the rain swallowing his silhouette, Tala stood frozen at the threshold, her child warm against her chest. She turned to find Nakoa watching her from the firelight, his face shadowed but his eyes resolute. The storm outside had quieted, but she knew another, fiercer one was gathering. And as her gaze held his, she understood with a tremor that she no longer feared being cast out. What she feared now was how much she would fight to stay. The storm came not with rain this time, but with voices. They rose first in whispers, carried from porch to porch, then gathered into a tide that could not be ignored. Tala felt it in the way doors stilled when she passed with her child, the way eyes followed her not with pity, but with sharpened judgment. The quilt she had pieced with patient hands no longer comforted her. Each stitch now seemed a mark of defiance, a banner declaring her choice to remain in the cabin of the man everyone feared. One morning, she carried a basket of herbs to the stream, hoping for silence. The air was heavy with late summer heat, the water thick with mud from the last storm. But as she knelt at the bank, a shadow fell over her. She looked up to see Judith Harper standing above, arms crossed, her mouth tight as rope. "You've sunk low, girl," Judith hissed. "Throwing yourself into the arms of a savage. You shame your husband's grave." Tala's grip tightened on the basket. Her pulse raced, yet her voice betrayed her calm. "I do what I must to keep my child alive." Judith's eyes narrowed, gleaming with the cruelty of certainty. "Alive, perhaps. But not clean. You've chosen your bed, and it will be your coffin." The words lingered like a curse long after Judith turned away. Tala pressed her trembling hand to her daughter's small back, whispering prayers into the child's hair, though she no longer knew if they reached heaven. That night, she gathered her few belongings. The decision tore at her, but she told herself it was mercy. Better to leave than bring ruin upon the man who had lifted her from the rain. She stood at the cabin door, shawl drawn close, heart breaking. Nakoa watched her without moving, his dark eyes unreadable in the firelight. "You cannot carry the weight of my shame," she whispered. "If I stay, they will destroy you." He stepped closer, the flames behind him throwing his shadow across the wall. He reached down, not to seize her, but to kneel. The sight of him, towering yet bent low, shook her to the core. He touched the laces of her worn boots, tying them with a care so gentle she nearly wept. When he rose he said only, "Their words are wind. The storm is not yours to bear alone." Her throat tightened. She wanted to believe him, but outside, the storm of voices gathered like thunderclouds. It broke days later, when Elias Harper and a group of men rode up to the cabin. Tala had been feeding Chenoa a piece of softened bread when the pounding of hooves rattled the ground. She rushed to the window and froze. 5 men dismounted, rifles slung across their shoulders, eyes hard with liquor and malice. Elias led them, smirk sharp as a blade. Nakoa stepped outside before they could call him out, his broad frame filling the clearing, shirtless as always, his scars bared like history carved into flesh. He did not reach for a weapon. His stillness was weapon enough. Elias spat into the dirt. "You've taken what doesn't belong to you," he shouted. "A white woman, bound to your lodge like a prize. You think we'll stand by?" Tala's heart pounded. She opened the door and stepped into the open, clutching Chenoa to her chest. Rain clouds churned above, the air charged with the promise of a storm. Her voice shook but carried across the clearing. "He saved me when none of you would. He gave us warmth when you gave us nothing but doors slammed in our faces. Do not speak of what belongs to whom." The men shifted uneasily, surprised by her defiance. But Elias sneered, eyes gleaming with triumph. "You see, boys? She admits it. The whore's chosen her savage." The word cut like glass. Tala's cheeks burned, but she held her child tighter, refusing to bow. She felt Nakoa's presence behind her, unmovable, steady as a mountain. Sheriff Briggs rode up moments later, breathless, his horse slick with sweat. He dismounted, placing himself between the groups, hands raised. "Enough!" His voice cracked with authority, though his eyes darted nervously. "You'll not bring blood into this town." Elias's laugh rang cruel. "Blood's already tainted. Look at them, playing house while we carry the shame." The crowd murmured agreement, voices swelling. The tension snapped taut, ready to break. Tala felt it like a storm pressing against her skin. Her knees trembled, yet she lifted her chin. The truth rose in her like fire. "Shame is yours," she said, her words carrying further than she thought possible. "Shame belongs to those who turned away from a mother in the rain, who left a child to shiver in the night. If there is sin here, it is not ours." A hush followed, stunned silence hanging heavy. For the first time, the storm of voices faltered. Yet Elias's face twisted with rage. He raised his rifle, the metal glinting in the weak light. Time slowed. Tala felt her breath catch, the world narrowing to the barrel aimed at the man who had saved her. Nakoa did not flinch. He stepped forward, shielding her and the child with his body, his silence louder than any threat. Lightning split the sky, thunder rolling so close it shook the earth. Elias's finger tightened on the trigger. Men shouted, Sheriff Briggs cursed, and the storm broke at last, not of rain, but of violence teetering on the edge. Tala's heart pounded in her throat. She could not breathe, could not cry out. She pressed her child's face into her shoulder, and waited for the world to shatter. And in that charged instant, standing in the shadow of rifles and judgment, she understood. The storm was no longer outside. It was here in this clearing, and it would decide whether she and her child would have a future, or none at all. The rifle shook in Elias's hands, though his sneer stayed fixed, his pride shackled to the trigger. Rain began to fall again, soft at first, then heavier, as though the heavens themselves demanded witness to what would unfold. Tala held her daughter close, the child's warm breath damp against her neck, her own pulse thunderous. She could feel Nakoa's steady form shielding her, broad shoulders squared, eyes fixed on Elias with the calm of one who had faced storms fiercer than men's hatred. "Stand down!" Sheriff Briggs barked, voice frayed with desperation. "No one's dying here tonight." But his words seemed fragile against the crackling tension, raindrops hissing as they struck the iron barrel. Elias's teeth clenched. "He doesn't belong. She doesn't belong. If law won't set it right, I will." His finger pressed harder, knuckles white. Then, with suddenness like a hawk strike, Nakoa moved. His hand shot forward, striking the rifle barrel aside just as thunder split the sky. The shot went wide, shattering a branch overhead. The crowd gasped, some stumbling back, others raising weapons in startled panic. Elias staggered, trying to recover, but Nakoa seized the rifle, wrenched it free, and cast it into the mud. His silence roared louder than any gunfire. For a moment, all was frozen. The storm, the men, Tala's breath held between fear and awe. Elias sprawled in the dirt, chest heaving, face contorted with rage and humiliation. He looked up, expecting death in Nakoa's eyes. But death did not come. Nakoa stepped back, fists unclenched, offering no retaliation beyond restraint. The refusal to strike shamed Elias more than a blow ever could. Whispers rippled through the men behind him. Courage, so easily ignited in a mob, faltered when met with dignity. They shifted uneasily, rifles lowering, eyes darting to one another. The storm beat down on them all, rain plastering hair to foreheads, soaking boots in mud, until no one looked like victor or coward, only men caught in their own folly. Tala stepped forward, shawl slipping from her shoulders, her voice rising clear above the storm. "This man is no thief. He is no curse. He gave me shelter when all of you turned me away. He saved my child when your doors closed against us. If there is shame, it lies with those who speak mercy on Sunday and spit poison the rest of the week." Her words, sharpened by truth and pain, struck the crowd harder than the rifle's shot. Faces shifted, some downcast, some hardened, but none could deny the trembling strength in her voice. She was no longer the widow begging in rain. She stood firm, her child in her arms, a figure of defiance and dignity. Sheriff Briggs drew himself taller, seizing the moment. "She speaks true. Enough of this." His gaze swept the men, daring any to challenge. "If law still means anything here, then hear it. The widow and her child are under his protection and mine. Let there be no more talk of curses or shame." The men muttered, but their anger had no anchor. One by one they turned, climbing onto horses, their figures swallowed by rain. Even Elias, mud-streaked and trembling, rose slowly, his eyes flicking between Tala and Nakoa with venom he could not voice. He spat into the dirt, then mounted his horse and rode into the storm, smaller than he had ever seemed. Silence followed, broken only by the steady drum of rain. Tala felt her knees weaken, but Nakoa's hand, broad and warm, steadied her elbow. She looked up at him, her breath caught in the stillness between them. His face remained carved of stone, yet his eyes burned with something fierce and unspoken. Gratitude, perhaps. Or something deeper, something that frightened and steadied her in equal measure. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled again, welcoming them back from the storm. Tala laid her daughter down, her small chest rising and falling in peaceful rhythm, untouched by the fury she had just witnessed. She lingered beside the hearth, dripping shawl forgotten, watching the flames lick upward. Nakoa stood across from her, his hair plastered to his brow, scars gleaming in the glow. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence was not the same as before. It was fuller now, heavy with what had been endured together. Finally, Tala stepped closer, her hand trembling as it rose. She rested her palm against the scars that crossed his chest, feeling the warmth beneath, the steady thrum of a heart that had chosen mercy over vengeance. Her voice, quiet but certain, broke the silence. "Safe with you." The words seemed to unmoor something in him. His eyes softened, the sharpness easing, though he gave no speech, no declaration. His hand rose, brushed a damp strand of hair from her face, and dropped again, the smallest gesture carrying the weight of vows unspoken. The storm outside eased, rain dwindling to a hush. Dawn pressed faint light against the window, pale and tender. It spilled across the bearskin, the quilt, the carved feathers by the hearth. Tala breathed it in, her chest loosening for the first time in years. She was not a burden. She was not a curse. She was simply alive, standing where dignity had been offered, where shame no longer bound her. Later, when the town would whisper again, their voices would hold less certainty. They had seen mercy stronger than violence, defiance steadier than hate. Perhaps they would not admit it aloud, but something had shifted. Tala knew the road ahead would not be easy, yet as she stood within the warmth of the cabin, her child safe, her hand lingering against Nakoa's chest, she felt the truth settle in her bones. She no longer feared storms. She had weathered the fiercest of them, and in the quiet after, she had found the shelter of belonging. And to you, listening now across the years, remember this. Storms will always come. Storms of voices, of judgment, of rejection. But sometimes the fiercest thunder cannot break what is built in silence, in small mercies, in steady hands that choose restraint over rage. Do not be afraid when the rain falls. For somewhere in it, you may yet find the shelter of a love that steadies you, even when the world turns its face away.